I think we're live.
Yay!
Yay. We're trying new technology today, everybody. So if something doesn't work out, we'll do it again. We'll repeat this somehow. But I'm hoping, we're getting better with our technology. So thank you for joining. We're here to talk about something that gets a lot of confusion. And we're going to start with I'm going to start with introducing Lauren because she's kind of a lot of times the go-to when somebody's inflammatory markers on their labs are high or they're showing some signs of inflammation, because food really makes a difference. So Lauren, our health coach, is an RN. She's done extensive training with different programs. She's incredibly knowledgeable and a great cook, great person to get recipes from and food plans from. So I'm going to let her, she's going to ask the questions, sorry, and I'm going to answer them
Awesome.
somewhat in the beginning.
Yeah. So I just want to start with kind of what is inflammation, and if you could just explain that a little bit more to us as far as what we're talking about with food and diet.
So if you ever woken up feeling stiff or puffy or bloated, those are signs, symptoms of inflammation. Do you have any rashes? Do you have any joint pains? Do you have just like fatigue overall? Those are all symptoms of inflammation. So in the conventional, kind of put my hat on, conventional medicine world, we have actually blood markers for those. And we can draw labs and say, here's the inflammation. And a lot of times they're not very specific, even though they're elevated. And we have our practice here on the little Barrier Island beach side. And I will say, well, this marker is kind of like me looking over the mainland and I see smoke. I can't tell what's fire, what's burning. And if it's really black and thick, I know it's quite a burn, and if it's just a little wisp. So we really dial in more to symptoms, even when we have the blood work that tells us that there's inflammation there. There's some that are a little more specific for endovascular kind of heart-related inflammation. We got a program coming up in a week, a little over a week, that we're going to talk about those kinds of things. But I think of it as fire, and the markers is smoke. The symptoms is the smoke. And inflammation can simmer for a while before we really have those symptoms. That's one of the reasons it's so important to kind of know where you are. The adage of, I think, every personal growth expert I've ever listened to through the years is, if you're starting off in New York and you want to fly to LA and you don't have your trajectory set even 2 degrees off, you're going to end up in Oregon or someplace else. So knowing where you are. There's symptom questionnaires out there that kind of assess. We use one in the office that comes from the Institute of Functional Medicine. It's derived from them, looking at symptom questionnaires that kind of tell us about inflammation from a symptom perspective. The thing is, not all of us know we have inflammation because we don't feel good ever. We're always at this low grade of but it's our normal. So until we get out of that inflammatory space, sometimes we don't realize that what we were feeling was actually the inflammation. And that happens so many times. I just had a patient, I haven't even told Lauren this. She's been working with a couple that live out of the area. And they gave up some foods to work on some inflammation. And she says she feels amazing. So yay, Lauren. We were able to kind of tailor by doing some testing to figure out what foods a little bit. But she says she didn't even realize how those foods were causing her to feel till she had enough time with them eliminated.
So maybe that's a great example that we could dive into. Was that a food that like everybody would be inflamed by, or was that something that was very specific to that patient?
So her testing was a little bit of both. I call them the 7 dwarves, but there's more than 7 of them. But there are foods out there that are inflammatory to a lot of us. That doesn't mean each one is inflammatory to every single person.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first people I met when I first started my integrative triad functional medicine, whatever we want to call this kind of training, was a gentleman who said every time he got exposed to gluten, he got a rash on his thumb and his hand. And I was like, my conventional brain was like, well, that can't be. If gluten was causing a systemic reaction, he should get it everywhere, right? Not just in a specific spot. And, as time would have it, I grew a little older, and those of you who know my family story, we have strong genetics for celiac and autoimmune, and gluten plays a big role in that. Now, if I get overexposed to gluten, my hand, just this hand, gets really red and inflamed. Now, there were injuries here. I used to play softball, jam the fingers over and over, but it's only here, and it's only not here. And it's happened so many times that the pattern is very clear. When I give in and have the flower pot bread at the restaurant, I'm going to wake up with my hand red and inflamed. So it's kind of nice to be able to reflect back on the food and know and make that decision in the moment. Is it worth it? Because most of the time it's not worth how my hand feels the next day. I can't ride my bike as well. I can't even sometimes hold the pen as well. Not worth it. But I think back to the gentleman I'm talking about. He's passed away, and I remember what a hard time I gave him. He was in more, I think, the chiropractic or naturopathic kind of world, and I was like, oh, come on, be and I was wrong. I was totally wrong. So it cannot be a systemic. So back to the patient we were talking about, she had some of the things that are more common, one of those seven dwarves. So the seven dwarves, and Lauren, you might have to jump in and help me. It's dairy, it's nightshades is one of the least common, but it's on the list. We have gluten. We have actually chocolate's also on the list, but further down, and caffeine's also on the list, but further down. I'm trying to remember. It's like I said, it's like naming the seven dwarves.
Oils.
The inflammatory oils, absolutely, which we all get exposed to when we're eating foods that are prepared outside the home. But when we look at food sensitivity testing, that's where my mind's going. Eggs,
Okay.
peanuts, shellfish, those are all on the list that a lot of people have problems with. We're not just talking about the, like, my throat closes up or I break out in hives kind of reaction. There's a lot of people, those foods cause inflammation, and especially dairy is so prevalent that the American Academy of Pediatrics at one point in time made the recommendation that any toddler, preschooler who had eczema and asthma and those kinds of symptoms, that it was worth 3 months dairy-free to see if it cleared everything up. That was how prevalent that can be in a population. The other thing is sometimes it's not what you expect, right? So she was eating a lot of chicken because she didn't eat red meat, lots and lots of poultry. And the poultry showed up on her list of being one of her more inflammatory foods. So she has diversified her diet a little bit. It's a challenge, it's a challenge sometimes to redo what your go-tos are, but it's possible, especially with some support.
Yeah. And then you start feeling better, and then it is a lot easier.
It reinforces itself. Yeah.
You don't want to go back unless, like you said, unless it's totally worth it to eat the bread or whatever.
And I didn't know in my family story the connection of gluten for a long time. I started a lot of my introduction to how I got into this type of medicine with how my journey of Hashimoto's and thyroid. But if I had known before that I have the genetic predisposition to look at gluten as a foreign body that I need to attack, and that in its pristine way is celiac, but it also sometimes they cross-react with other things. So it is considered one of the universal triggers of autoimmune disorders when you have this gene. Not everybody reacts, but if I had known back then, even when I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I may have been able to save some of the thyroid function along the way, instead of needing full thyroid replacement at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I had, that's a little bit. So we also look with autoimmune disorders, we like to look at, gut health, microbiome health, and whether or not the foods are stimulating that kind of inflammation.
Mm-hmm. So even if somebody's not necessarily feeling inflamed, but they want to do some testing, or like there is some just lab tests that you would recommend, or if they maybe do feel some inflammation, there are some specific ways to kind of dive into that.
So what I would like, if wishes were horses, I think everybody, even if they feel good, should draw that panel of inflammatory markers to see if something's simmering in there. It's so much better to catch a fire when it's, look at LA, when it's just tindering versus a full on blaze. It's so much better to catch it early. The food sensitivity part and the gut microbiome inflammation is, if you're coming in and the flame is already catching, because you've acquired an autoimmune disorder or you've got something else going on in a not so healthy fashion, those tests can be incredibly revealing. And it could be a lecture webinar in and on itself about how specific and how good food sensitivity testing is and how things morph and change over time. But it can really help clue in quickly. But like I said, the biggest thing I get, I've had people cry. We also have done the genetics on some patients. It's usually out of pocket expense. Most insurance companies won't look at it, but if you have the genes to react to celiac, or that gene where gluten, your body gliadin identifies it as a foreign something that it needs to attack. I had a patient cry, more than one, yes, you're positive, because they love their bread. And we in the office, like Lauren gave me an amazing recipe for these gluten-free bagels with cassava flour that are very, very easy. They're so good that a snack accident occurred. I think I made 8 of them and they were gone in like 36 hours with the people in my household. But there's also high protein bread and things like that she's helped people with recipes, and we bring it in and we make it we actually bake it in the oven at the office sometimes. It makes the office smell amazing. So there are options. Not saying everybody needs to give up gluten, but if you have certain things, then it might make sense.
Great, great. So what can the chronic kind of inflammation lead to, even if it is, not some giant fire that's going to cause, a disease right away? What does the long-term low-grade inflammation do?
So worst case scenario, we look at, cancer. So everybody understands that, your risk of skin cancer goes up the more sunburns you have, right? That is an inflammatory state, having a sunburn. So the more you've had over time, the more likely you are to have skin cancer occur. Reflux that's not addressed the way it's supposed to, long term increases risk of esophageal cancer, which is a hard one to beat. Not that you can't beat it, but it is a hard one to beat. Long-term inflammation, we talk about poop all the time in the office. It's kind of a joke, right? So when you're constipated, that is waste products that your body is meant to get rid of. And the person who goes once or twice a week has like an escalated, risk of having colon cancer, right? Because those waste products sit in there and they interact with the cells of the colon and cause inflammation. So at its worst, we're looking at cancer. The other kind of worse is cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline, right? So chronic H. pylori, which is a bacterial infection that causes stomach ulcers, it's treated very differently than people who have reflux because they're sensitive to tomato sauce, for example, is found to have accelerated plaque going on in the arteries here, right? So it's a chronic kind of inflammation. C-reactive protein, which can go up for so many reasons. That's usually my first, like, you got smoke coming up, across the bridge here. Dental infections, periodontal disease, gum disease is the layman's term for that, is 100% linked chronic, that kind of inflammation with heart disease. Herpes infections, the people who break out all the time, a lot of people come to us because they want natural alternatives, right? So they want to know how to naturally control or eliminate herpes or other kind of viral infections. And there are some protocols, but there are some people who it tends to linger. And long-term chronic infections like that are actually, HSV especially, is now being linked to dementia, as well as heart disease. And it's an inflammatory state when you have a chronic infection like that going on. Mold exposure, lungs, it absolutely impacts that in the long term. Not everybody gets sick from mold, but over time, everybody's lungs have issues from inhaling too many particulates in the air. So we're big fans of air purifiers and upgrading the filter, for the house and things like that. Let me see, other chronic inflammation. I think those are some really good off-the-cuff examples that most people can relate to.
So I think it's important to maybe touch on that some inflammation is beneficial, right? I mean, it's our
Oh
body's
yeah.
response to.
Who goes to the dermatologist or the plastic surgeon or the esthetician and they microplane or microneedle or laser you because it causes collagen formation and it helps get rid of the wrinkles, right? So there's a reason we have an inflammatory response to stuff, it sometimes is beneficial, and having that kind of immune system response to a cut on the leg or getting a salmonella infection, where you got a lot of inflammation, blood coming in the stool, things like that. Having that kind of inflammation actually is part of the healing process. It's chronic inflammation that's more of a concern. So somebody comes in, let's just use C-reactive protein as an example, and it's over 20, and I find out that they were down with the flu, everybody in their family was sick. I'm not as concerned as the person who comes in, hasn't had a procedure done, hasn't wrecked on their bike and skinned up their legs, hasn't have anything. They're like, I don't have any symptoms, and their C-reactive protein is high. I'm more concerned than that it's chronic. Of course, you repeat it, you make sure you don't jump into food sensitivity and all the other testing until you know it's real. So I'll have people wait 4 or 6 weeks and go back and do it. And I'll say, make sure you don't feel sick. Make sure, let's just see if this is real. And then if it is, we start peeling back the layers of the onion to see what we can find.
Awesome.
So
beyond those kind of 7 dwarves, like what if I don't really have an actual reaction to dairy or to gluten? What are the other foods that may be causing, an issue if it's not a real allergy or a reaction?
Right. So we talked a little bit about the inflammatory oils. It's really tough because our food has changed so much, so what you could eat or your mother could eat, Wonder Bread isn't the same Wonder Bread. And I think most people would consider Wonder Bread not having a whole lot of nutritional value, whether it was 1965 or now, but what they've changed with the oils, especially in regards to cardiovascular disease, it turns out that a high linoleic acid diet, that type of oil and that type of metabolite causes plaque outside of cholesterol. The linoleic, that family of oils is something we can't make inside of ourselves. They're plant-based, and so they are essential. So we essentially need them. Unfortunately, the food industry, big food, has incorporated them to the point where we're getting excessive. And those are primarily our refined seed oils. That's our, sesame seed oil and, soybean oil and safflower oil and soy, all of those. Palm oil, there's some division on whether or not certain ones are healthy or not, but pretty much it's our refined seeds. Olive oil is a refined seed oil as well. It's considered to be less of a threat because it has a little bit more of the omega-3s in it than it does the other, but it also has that lovely green color. The phenolic acids that are in there that change the color are considered health beneficial, so it kind of balances out the other. But it's huge. You do not eat outside the home and have anything that was made or prepared with an oil or fried on a skillet or cooked on a grill or dressed with a marinade or a salad that you're not getting exposed to those. And unfortunately, so I just heard that McDonald's didn't make as much profit because people are eating out less. So maybe we're seeing the cusp of the cultural trend go downwards. But we in 2010, the average American ate outside the home 15 times a week. 2020, they didn't do the survey for a couple years, and then they did it differently. But the average American on that survey, 2022, I believe, eats outside the home 18 times a week. I'm 62. So I grew up, I don't even think we ate outside the home once a week. I mean, once a month. We might go on a potluck, to my mom's sister, my aunt, and everybody bring food, or a neighbor, or a cookout in the backyard with other families. But actually going to restaurants was incredibly rare. And I know Lauren's significantly younger than I am. Did you eat outside the home as much growing up?
Maybe
No.
once a week, maybe.
Yeah, it's a huge shift. It's a huge shift in eating foods that are prepared outside the home. And it's not been a good one. And we'll talk about that more next week when we do the program over at Gleason on heart health. But we like to measure those oils in people. So one of the things that's anti-inflammatory, that is a good thing, is eating foods that have the omega-3s, the salmon and the tuna and the heavily fatted fish, but there are other food sources as well. And getting those into your diet, you can always take a capsule. We have a lot of patients who choose that. They don't like fish, or for some reason they don't like cooking it at home or whatever.
Sardines, really good, I promise. Remember?
Yeah. I haven't tasted it. You've not brought it in when I was there.
I need to make them. I'm
You
scared
need to bring it in.
Leave us.
But I have patients who there's a lab of a goal place for your omega-3s to be in, specifically DHA, EPA, and there's specific ones for heart and brain health that we measure. And I have patients get there with food, so it doesn't mean you have to take a capsule, but you do have to eat the food. You have to trade it around. Other anti-inflammatory fiber helps bind up, toxic metabolites. It helps get you more regular. The very first weight loss book ever written over 100 years ago was based upon increasing fiber, because fiber is filling. Fiber, does so many health benefits. The higher your fiber is in your diet, the less your risk of colon cancer for multiple reasons. So fiber is a great anti-inflammatory food. A lot of our whole nuts, so we talked about this refined seed oils being not so good, but the nuts themselves a lot of them are anti-inflammatory. And of course, all of our fresh produce. The problem is a lot of us don't get to goal. And back to fiber, people will say, well, I eat a salad a couple times a week. And if you really look at the fiber charts, there's not a whole lot of fiber in salad. Our legumes, our nuts and seeds are probably the highest. I make a bean related kind of soup, stew, casserole, something weekly to get more of the legumes in the diet. So what am I forgetting any of them? I'm trying to think. I have a template that I usually put out of the anti-inflammatory foods.
Sorry, no, I mean, like you said, the fresh whole foods. How many servings a day is that, like, what would you recommend?
So the USDA says 5, and that's really supposed to be 4 vegetables and 1 fruit, you know? Most people make it 4 fruits and 1 vegetable. There's a lot of people who overindulge. But I think when we look at optimal, not just like minimum requirements, we're usually looking at 7 or 8 servings a day. Now, defining a serving size, like what defines a serving size of spinach, right? Versus a banana. They're different. It's not always the same thing. Most of the time, half of banana is a serving, right?
Great. Yeah. So at least 5 servings, but 7 or 8 would be the goal.
Yeah.
Leafy greens, we haven't really talked about. I mean, not super high in fiber, maybe, but very anti.
They're really good tip for you. They're very anti-inflammatory. So that's another approach is the more alkaline the body is, the less inflamed it is, the harder cancer cells have to grow, the harder it is for viruses and chronic infections to set up. The best way to become alkaline is eating lots of leafy greens and vegetables. The easiest way to become acidic is to eat sugar, and so balance, sugar is an inflammatory food. To me, that's like a duh, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand that we have saliva that turns a lot of things into sugar before we even swallow it. So the really refined grains and things like that no longer count as a whole food because they've been so pulverized and our saliva turns them to sugar. So being alkaline, huge benefit. Um, I do every once in a while have a patient or a patient's husband or child who will not eat vegetables, and that's when we kind of recommend going with the greens drinks and things like that. And there's multiple options out there, and there's a lot of really good ones. So I'm not going to say in here and say, oh, this one's so good and this one's not so good, because there are a lot of really good options out there. Whole foods are best. We always come back to that, though.
What about berries? That's kind of a one that everybody knows about, right? So blueberries,
Right.
raspberries.
So one of my colleagues, kind of internet guru people now, Deanna Minich, talks about a lot about eating the rainbow. She's a PhD, I think, nutrition degreed person, but she talks a lot about eating the rainbow and the pigments that make those brightly colored fruits and vegetables actually have very prominent impact in the cells. I'm trying to think of who I borrowed the slide from. I'll get it to you, Lauren, but it showed some cancer cells in culture. They were specifically actually breast cancer cells, and it was the person being exposed to the standard American diet, but the slide's a little old, so I'm going to say around 2015. And then they put the patient on a primarily plant-based diet. That's not saying they went raw vegan, but way more plants. And you can see in the staining, a lot of the cancer genes were turned off. Not all of them, but it was amazing. Do you know what I mean? Just by changing the diet, nothing else had happened. And it wasn't that long. It was like 2 weeks. We're not talking, we checked a year later. But I will find the slide.
I would love to.
But it's amazing. And the brightly colored fruits and vegetables, the blueberries, the raspberries, or the latest MLM product that's on the market from some tropical fruit that's really this. There are benefits to those fruits. There are benefits. ORAC value is something we talk about in like more scientific terms. Of the higher the ORAC value, the more potent the antioxidant is in that food. And usually the more vibrant the color, the higher the ORAC value. You don't have to look at the chart. Puny little, I know they're big now, the pine berry, the white strawberries don't have the pigment, right? So they may have nutritional flavor, palate value, but they don't bring that punch of the ORACs like the others do.
And eating the rainbow doesn't have to be some crazy task. I have patients all the time that are saying, how do I do that? And it can be so fun to go to the grocery store and try to pick just 5 different colors of something, and
Yeah.
every week you try a different color of a vegetable you haven't had, and little tricks like going to the produce place, or some different options other than Publix doesn't always have a lot of options, so sometimes you got to think outside of the box.
Yeah.
But eating the rainbow is a fun, and it is doable, so I love sharing that.
I remind people that it takes 5 times to taste something to really know whether you like it or not. Even think of a baby, the first time you put sweet potatoes in their mouth, which is sweet, and they like it, they spit it back out at you. The biggest hurdle for trying new foods is usually thinking you have to chew it and swallow it if you don't like it. So for parents, as they're trying to expand their kids' palate, or for an adult, it's like give yourself permission to chew it a couple times. If you don't like it, spit it in the napkin and throw it away. But try it 5 times first. I mean, who liked beer the first time they tasted it? I've never liked beer, but and I have had patients say, "Oh, you need to go to World of Beer and try this one. You will like this one." I don't need another bad habit, so I'm not looking for beer suggestions. But most of the time, things take time.
Yeah.
And I graduated and went to college thinking I didn't like a whole lot of foods because my mother, bless rest her in peace, mom, was not raised in the kitchen cooking, right? She was out in the field. She grew up in a farm family. And so, LaChoy came out of a can. I thought I hated Chinese food, things like that. I hated a lot of vegetables because they would be cooked to death, because she didn't know better, right? And so over time, I've discovered I actually like a lot of the things that I thought I hated, just,
Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of cooking it a different way, or you don't like it raw. That's all right, or it's a different recipe. Like
yeah.
it's don't quit, like you said, when you don't like it the first time.
Yeah, give it another try. And I know Lauren, I've done it before, and I know Lauren's willing to do it, is to go grocery shopping with people, like a field trip, and especially trying, to get organic, like support local businesses. We got Fields and Forks in South County. They do have some pickup spots. But the produce place you mentioned, which is right across Pineda, just north on Wickham, they have in the back what they call the dollar bags, or maybe they're $1.50 now, but they're the produce that looks ugly, like the potato that's twisted the wrong way, or things like that. And I started experimenting with those dollar bags a long time ago, and that's where I found out that I liked a lot of things I didn't know I liked, and I wasn't spending a whole lot of money figuring it out, ruining recipes on, who knew. But I know they still have them because I mentioned it to a patient recently who went and got them. So I know they still have in the back their
Yeah.
dollar and a half bags.
Yes, I see them weekly. I love that place. Mhm.
So organic versus non-organic, that's a conversation. Again, it could be almost a whole nother webinar. I kind of tune into the environmental working group, where if it's on the dirty dozen list, I try the best I can to get it organic. Um, the flip side, if it's not, I'm not sweating it as much. And they have done studies that show that the organic produce doesn't have quite as many nutrients as the non-organic. Why is that? Well, it's because they put nutrients back in the soil when they're raising it conventionally. So there's arguments for that. But from an inflammatory perspective, if you're not eating green vegetables and brightly colored fruits and you start eating them, you're going in the right direction. What toxins are there are balanced by the fact that you've shifted your diet,
Right.
and so progress over perfection. When we do small changes in a positive direction, they show up in the health. The same way small changes in the bad direction show up in health as well.
Yep. Yeah. Baby steps. Just because you can't afford organic doesn't mean you don't need to still be trying to pick some veggies.
Yeah. And that's where, like I said, the farmers markets, fields to forks, Brevard County Extension Service sponsors a farmers market at Wickham Park on Thursdays. It's like from 3 to 6 during daylight savings time, and I think maybe till 7 during daylight saving. I don't remember. I might have it backwards. But anybody who's there that says they're selling organic produce, they've actually gone behind to verify it. Whereas a lot of times, unless you know the farmer who you're buying from at a local food market, you
Yeah.
might have bought it at Sam's Club. You just don't know. So I always tell people it's worth a one-time field trip out there, and then you can find out what other farmers markets they go to, that might be closer to your house. But it's definitely worth the one-time field trip. And for a long time, and I don't know if it's still true, but they were accepting the cards that we get when we're financially distressed to help us buy food. And during COVID, they had a grant to give people some money to spend there, which was amazing because during that point in time, getting really good, healthy food was huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what can somebody do? If they think they might, be dealing with some inflammation, other than, okay, I need to add some more veggies to my diet? What specifically could you help with, or Radiantly Healthy?
Well, we want to figure out how to offer. I don't know if we've got it figured out yet. I've been going back and forth with the lab. I was wanting to be able to give people a panel that they could draw and just see what their levels are, not engaging as becoming a patient, but where am I? Where do I stand? And so I'm been going back and forth a little bit with the lab about that, on how to make that happen. But we also have some panels which we roll together and a one-time fee. Like, you don't really want to become a patient, but you just want to explore one aspect.
Mhm.
So we have some of those available already. Are they on our Facebook? I don't know.
I don't
They
think so.
may not be yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for example, telling the truth in advance, Natural Awakenings next month, we're doing a performance panel for people who want to know how can they optimize their athletic performance a little bit. And it's, I think, $299, including the labs and including, a one-time consultation with those labs and it's geared towards, the performance person. And we're also going to be promoting that with partnering hopefully with some of the gyms and CrossFits and things like that, because a lot of people maybe are youngish like Lauren and not really looking, for transferring from their existing doctor, but they like some of the cool, interesting tests we have to offer. And we definitely bring some expertise to the table. I've been doing this a long time, a lot longer than most.
Mhm.
So.
Awesome.
Other things you can do for inflammation: exercise, sleep well, sweat. Again, could you get in your far infrared sauna and sweat and be doing the perfect thing? I tell patients, like, well, we're in Florida. It's really easy to sweat, So,
Get
and
sunlight and some fresh air and
yeah,
do an activity.
yeah. So those kinds of things are very helpful and easy to do, free to do. Today maybe a little harder to sweat outside, but you know, we don't have a couple weeks go by that we don't have the day that you could get pretty sweaty outside.
Yeah.
Don't get sunburned. I don't want the dermatologist coming after me. No sunburns.
But you'll get your vitamin D.
Yeah, vitamin D it does come from the sun. It works better if it comes from the sun. It's primarily made on the trunk. So if you really want to get your vitamin D from the sun, you got to be out there without your shirt. Unfortunately. So the official recommendations from the World Congress that happened right before COVID was to be in the sun in a male European bathing suit.
Mhm.
So, of course, it was held in Brussels, so it was a European Congress, but I thought that was quite interesting, because most of our vitamin D, the skin surface area, that's why a lot of people who have the golfer's tan or the tennis tan and they're shocked that their vitamin D is low is because they're not getting it
Really.
under the wraps.
You heard it here,
So.
everyone. Patton said take your shirt off and go get some sun.
Wait, I don't know if Lauren works remotely a lot. She comes to office a couple days a week. But we do have a patient who runs around close to where the office is with the shirt off or goes for a brisk walk and started doing that because we were talking about it. Prefers not to swallow capsules if they can get away with it, right? Let's get it the way we were intended to get it. And so, and then I have some surfers who have amazing vitamin D in the summer, but in the winter when they start wearing their wetsuits, it kind of drops off. Yeah.
So we would love to help then, right? Extend the offer for the labs. And sometimes it's just a matter of with me and talking about food ideas. It can be overwhelming sometimes to feel like, okay, how do I eat the rainbow? But that's definitely something I love to talk with people about. So creating meal plans, recipe ideas, anything like that. We are here and have a lot of resources and are glad to share them.
To share the value. We're going to be creating a few more Facebook kind of groups around certain topics. We haven't actually launched any of them yet, I don't think. We just talked about it, which would be a good place to get information. But also, those of you who are watching today, thank you. And the ones who watch the replay, thank you. We really would love some feedback. What would be of most value to you? We're sitting around a table thinking, well, what do we see in the office that would be of value in the office? But we would love to know if there are topics or forums or ways of communicating with you that you would prefer. So just, put it in the chat or the DM or the Facebook messaging, call the office, text Lauren. Lauren's got a phone that takes text too. What is your number?
Would ask me that.
It's a new phone, so it's not right on the top of any of our heads.
355 something. I don't know.
I can find it. Hold on.
I'm using my phone, so I don't want to ruin this.
Yeah, I can find it. Just got to look at my phone. So to reach Lauren directly via text. Now she does have a life. She is an elite athlete, so she might be out running 40 miles or something. But the phone number for the office to reach the health coach is 321-355-8562. And it is an iPhone, so it does take text messages as well. So 321-355-8562. And we will look forward to being of more value to you in the future. And Lauren's an amazing resource. I really want to encourage people to reach out and take advantage of it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to help in any way that I can.
All right. So we're going to close it.
Yes.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.